Garrett Fain turned onto Maple Road 15 minutes before 3 o'clock in the afternoon, a time when he was usually still tightening nuts on the stern of a trawler. Friday's shift had been cut short by a parts shortage, and the shop foreman had said, "Go home, Fain. You don't want to be sitting around here doing nothing." Garrett didn't mind. An extra half day of freedom wouldn't hurt, though he wasn't sure what to do to fill it. The old Ford coughed as he turned off the engine in front of the garage. Garrett looked at his reflection in the rearview mirror, a face with weathered skin, wrinkles in the corners of his eyes, gray streaking through his once brown hair. 45 years old, but it felt like 70. Marilyn's car wasn't in the driveway. She must have been late at the supermarket or gone to her mother's house. Garrett couldn't remember if she'd said anything about her plans for the day, but frankly, he hadn't really listened the last couple years. Their conversations had long ago become an exchange of duty phrases. He opened the gate, walked into the yard, and froze. From behind the hedge that separated their property from Trevor Hope's, there was laughter, the sound of a woman's laughter that he would have recognized from 1,000. Marilyn was laughing in a way she hadn't laughed in his presence in years. Garrett slowly approached the hedge and gently pushed the branches apart. Beyond it was a view of his neighbor's small but well-maintained backyard with a swimming pool, an unacceptable luxury for most New Bedford residents. But Trevor, who worked for an insurance company, could afford it. Or maybe he had other sources of income that no one knew about. There were 2 people splashing in the pool. Marilyn, his wife, in a red one-piece swimsuit that Garrett hadn't seen in years, and Trevor Hope in blue swim trunks that showed off his trim body. They weren't doing anything objectionable, just swimming and talking. But something in their poses, in how close they were to each other, the way Marilyn threw her head back, laughing at Trevor's jokes, titillated him. That laughter. It had never been so carefree and sincere, not even in their best years. Garrett wanted to call out to them, but something stopped him. Instead, he pulled his cell phone out of his pocket, an old Samsung that was long overdue for retirement, and pressed the video button. The camera focused on the 2 figures in the pool. Trevor swam closer to Marilyn, saying something in her ear. She laughed and playfully pushed him away. He caught her hand and pulled her back. They were so engrossed in each other that they didn't notice anything around them. "Amazing," Garrett muttered as he continued filming. A distant summer day, July 2001, came to mind. Clark's Cove Beach, where he and Marilyn had spent every weekend that summer. She, 20, he 23. She's in a white bathing suit running along the water's edge, laughing, calling out to him. She has long, windswept brown hair and a smile that takes his breath away. He catches up with her, grabs her in his arms, and they fall into the cool Atlantic water, bodies entwined. Now she's laughing in another man's pool. Trevor showed up on their block about a year ago. Divorced, without children, he immediately attracted the neighbors with his friendliness and willingness to help. Women in particular were attracted to his gallantry, whether he was helping them with heavy bags from the store or complimenting them on their new hairstyles. Marilyn was no exception, though Garrett didn't think much of it. She was 42, and attention from an attractive man could hardly be more than a compliment to her ego. At least that's what he'd thought until today. Garrett put the phone down, thinking, "What am I even doing?" But then picked it up again and continued filming. In the video, Trevor had already climbed out of the pool and held out his hand to Marilyn, helping her out. She leaned on his palm and gracefully climbed the steps. Drops of water ran down her body, emphasizing the contours that had once driven Garrett crazy. When was the last time he'd looked at her like that, though? When was the last time they'd even seen each other naked in the light of day, rather than in the twilight of the bedroom, hurriedly performing marital duty? Trevor handed Marilyn a towel and she blotted her face. They stood close, very close. Their conversation was indistinguishable, but from their gestures and facial expressions, they were talking about something personal. Marilyn touched Trevor's hand, and he covered her fingers with his. It only lasted a few seconds, but for Garrett, it was like a punch in the gut. He put the phone down and backed away from the hedge. There was anger swirling inside, but strangely mixed with fatigue and something akin to relief. Like he'd finally gotten confirmation of something he'd suspected for a long time. Entering the house through the back door, Garrett walked straight into the kitchen, pulled a bottle of beer from the refrigerator, and drank half of it in one gulp. There was a cup with dried coffee residue in the sink. Marilyn never washed up after herself right away. Framed family photos stared back at him from the living room. Their wedding, Dina's birth, family vacations, increasingly rare as the years went by. The last one had the three of them standing in front of the Statue of Liberty, Dina, then 16, between them, and he and Marilyn already a distance apart. He hadn't noticed it then. Garrett pulled out his phone and watched the tape. The quality was poor, but he could make out what was going on well enough. Their close poses, their touching, Marilyn's laughter, and that hand of Trevor's, lingering on her lower back as they headed toward the house. What had it come to? Were they sleeping together? When had it started? Garrett remembered how, 2 months ago, Marilyn had started taking extra care of her appearance. A new haircut, wrinkle cream she'd never mentioned before, yoga classes twice a week. He wrote it off as a mid-life crisis and even rejoiced. Maybe it would breathe new life into their relationship. But she didn't get prettier for him. She was prettier for someone else. And there was a time when they couldn't get enough of each other. After they married, they rented a tiny apartment on the outskirts of town, all they could afford. Garrett had just gotten a job at a shipyard, and Marilyn was finishing her accounting degree. Money was always tight, but they were happy. In the evenings, they sat on the sofa, drank cheap wine, and dreamed of the future, of their own home, of their children, of the travels they would make. Dina was born 2 years later, a tiny bundle with a wrinkled red face and a mop of dark hair. Garrett remembered the first time he held his daughter in his arms, when his heart felt like it was going to burst with happiness. Marilyn had been radiant with joy, despite the difficult labor and the sleepless nights that followed. And then the routine began. Work, home, work, home, work. Taking care of the baby, the perpetual lack of money, the fatigue. Garrett's promotion to chief mechanic brought a welcome improvement in their financial situation. They were even able to take out a mortgage on the house, modest, but their own. Marilyn took a part-time job at Price Chopper Supermarket when Dina went to school. Not the bookkeeping job she dreamed of, but it gave them extra income and insurance. The years flew by unnoticed. Dina grew up, went to college in Boston, and it was just the two of them, two strangers under the same roof. When did that happen? When did the ease with which they once talked about everything disappear? When did the desire to touch each other disappear? Garrett took another sip of beer and glanced at his phone again. The video stopped at a shot of Marilyn looking over her shoulder at Trevor with a smile he hadn't seen in a long time. Should have gone to Trevor right now, told him everything he thought, or wait for Marilyn to return and make a scene. Smash the phone against the wall, smash their family photos, scream betrayal. But Garrett suddenly felt a strange calm. Maybe it was the same calm that people who'd been sick with an unknown disease for a long time felt when they finally got a diagnosis, albeit a disappointing one. He sent the video to cloud storage so he wouldn't lose it and considered his options. Dina was coming to visit them tomorrow, a weekend at home, a rare event since she'd been in college. Marilyn's mother, Leona, was also going to stop by for lunch, and they'd invited old friends, Ray and Winona Sargent, a family dinner that Marilyn had been planning for weeks. The plan formed in Garrett's mind suddenly, but with startling clarity. He would not make a scene today. He would wait until tomorrow afternoon when they would all gather around the table, the big screen in the living room connected to the Wi-Fi, the video he just made. Everyone would see at once who Marilyn Fain, his wife and the mother of his daughter, had become. He took one last sip of beer, tossed the bottle in the trash, and went to shower. There was a long evening ahead and an even longer day tomorrow. But for the first time in months, Garrett felt a surge of energy. Finally, he would take action instead of going with the flow. As the water ran down his body, he thought about what he would say to Marilyn when she returned. "Hi, honey, how was your day?" The usual question to which she would give the usual answer. And she wouldn't know what he saw, what he knows. He wiped himself down, pulled on a clean t-shirt and jeans, and walked down to the living room. Sat down in his chair, turned on the TV and waited, glancing occasionally at his phone where the tape that had changed his life was stored. The next morning, Garrett woke up before his alarm clock. Saturday morning was still just glimmering in the gap between the curtains, but sleep wasn't coming. Next to him, turned away from the wall, was Marilyn. Her breathing was even and deep. Garrett stared at the outline of her figure beneath the blanket and tried to figure out when they'd started sleeping like this, at arm's length from each other. She'd gotten home around 6 last night, with bags from the supermarket and damp hair gathered into a bundle. Trevor's pool, then. Garrett said hello as usual, helped unload the groceries. Marilyn chatted about the sale at Price Chopper, about Lenny mixing up the discount coupons at the register again, about her upcoming lunch with Dina and Leona. Not a word about Trevor, not the slightest sign of guilt. Garrett gazed into her face, looking for traces of what he'd seen through the hedge, the lightness and sparkle with which she'd laughed in the pool. But before him was the familiar Marilyn A., slightly tired, middle-aged woman, mechanically performing her duties. It was only when she was changing in the bedroom that he noticed the wet bathing suit tossed into the dirty laundry basket. Red? That one. "Decided to go swimming today?" he asked, trying to keep his voice casual. Marilyn froze for a split second, but immediately continued folding the laundry. "Yeah, Trevor invited me, since it was a warm day. I told you he offered to use the pool whenever he wanted." "I don't remember that conversation." "I definitely mentioned it," she shrugged. "He's got a great pool, heated. He said he didn't use it much in the summer. He was at work." Garrett wanted to ask if she often swam there without him while he worked at the plant, but instead he just nodded and went into the garage to tinker with the wiring in his Ford. Anger bubbled up inside, but some part of him watched his own calmness with wonder. Had he become so calloused over the years that even jealousy felt half-hearted? Now, lying in the pre-dawn twilight, he looked at his watch. 5:37. It would be at least 5 hours before Dina arrived. She never arrived before noon. Marilyn's mother had promised to be there by 2 and the sergeants by 3. Garrett got out of bed carefully, trying not to wake his wife, and walked out of the bedroom. In the kitchen, he put the coffee on and, while the water was boiling, pulled out his phone again. The video from yesterday was still there. He watched it again, taking in every detail. Maybe he was exaggerating. Maybe this was really just a neighborhood friendship. But no, it wasn't like an innocent neighborly relationship. Trevor stood too close, his hand lingering on her waist too long, and that laugh of Marilyn's, casual, genuine. When was the last time she'd laughed like that with him? Garrett sipped his coffee and stared out the window. Behind him was a view of the neat houses of Maple Road, all identical. His own house, the one they'd bought 15 years ago, wasn't much different from the others, the same 2-story house, with a small lot, faded blue paint on the shutters that had needed to be repainted last year. He'd always been proud of this house, his property, his little piece of the American dream. But now the house seemed cramped, stuffy, crowded with unspoken words and unnoticed glances. How long had he and Marilyn lived next to each other without really touching? A year? 2? 5? Garrett couldn't say for sure. Time seemed to stretch into one endless gray line: work, home, occasional weekends, work again. 15 years in the factory, the same faces, the same jokes in the smoking room, the same boss yelling over every little thing. Marilyn wanted more, he knew that. She dreamed of traveling, of her own little business, maybe a cafeteria or a bookstore. But the money always went to something more pressing: roof repairs, Dina's schooling, a new car when the old one finally died. And every time Marilyn talked about her dreams, Garrett felt guilty. And then she stopped talking about it too. He'd always thought he was providing for his family, doing the right thing. A job, stability, a roof over their heads. Isn't that what matters most? But looking at the video of Trevor, he realized he'd missed something important. Maybe it wasn't just about the money. Trevor Hope wasn't just more successful than him. He knew how to listen. Garrett could see it in the way his neighbor looked at Marilyn when she said something. He didn't interrupt, didn't roll his eyes, didn't wave her off like Garrett did when he was tired after a 12-hour shift. As he thought about it, Garrett didn't notice Marilyn enter the kitchen. She was already dressed, jeans and the light blue blouse that had once been his favorite. "Can't sleep?" she asked, pouring herself a cup of coffee from the coffee pot. "Yeah, thinking about lunch today." "It'll be fine," Marilyn smiled. "I'll make my tuna casserole. Your mom loves it." "My mom's been buried for 7 years," Garrett said dryly. Marilyn stammered, realizing her mistake. "I'm sorry, I meant my mom, of course. You know how Leona loves that casserole." Garrett was silent. Marilyn fussily took eggs and butter out of the refrigerator and started breakfast. He watched her movements honed by years of practice, but lacking the grace he'd seen in the pool yesterday. Or was she just playing a role for him, the role of a tired housewife who had long ago lost her flirtatiousness and playfulness? After breakfast, Marilyn retired to the living room to begin preparations for dinner, and Garrett returned to the garage, the only place in the house where he felt comfortable. Among the tools and spare parts, his thoughts were becoming clearer. He watched the video again, now turning the sound down to a minimum. The thing that hurt him the most wasn't even the fact that Marilyn could cheat on him. It was certainly a blow to his ego, but something told him that the relationship with Trevor might still be at an innocent stage. Flirting, maybe kissing, but no more than that. Garrett knew his wife all too well. She wasn't the type to throw herself into a fling. No, what hurt him most was that with Trevor, she was her real self, alive, emotional, laughing heartily. With him, she was just a pale copy of herself. The garage door creaked open and Marilyn walked in. "Garrett, you'll need to go get some wine before dinner. I forgot to buy some yesterday." "Okay." He nodded, quickly turning off his phone. "What are you looking at?" she asked, coming closer. "Just a video from work," Garrett lied. "How to use the new welding machine." Marilyn gave him a strange look, but didn't pursue the subject. "You'd better help me clean up. Dina's coming home soon and the guest room's a mess." "I'll be right there," he said, and Marilyn left. Garrett exhaled and tucked his phone into his pocket. Something had changed in their relationship, and much earlier than Trevor had shown up. When had they stopped sharing their thoughts with each other? When had their conversations been reduced to mundane details? He remembered their early years together. They could talk all night, about books, about politics, about their dreams. Marilyn was an accounting student then, and he admired her tenacity and intelligence. She wasn't afraid to argue with him, to defend her point of view. And he wasn't afraid to appear weak by telling her his fears and doubts. Where did it all go? Dissolved into the daily grind, the electric bill, the leaky roof, the endless shifts at the factory. Garrett sighed and headed for the house. It was still about 3 hours before Dina arrived, and he decided to help Marilyn with the cleaning, one last act of normalcy before he turned their lives upside down with his video. They cleaned in silence, occasionally exchanging short phrases. "Pass the vacuum cleaner. Don't forget the curtains. That vase where?" Watching Marilyn, Garrett tried to see signs of Infidelity guilt, nervousness, overprotectiveness. But she seemed the same as always, except a little more enthusiastic about the upcoming dinner. Marilyn had always loved having guests. In the early years of their marriage, their house, then a tiny rented apartment, was always full of friends. She cooked for everyone, laughed, was the soul of the company. Now the guests were rare, mostly on holidays, and then only the closest ones. "I'm so glad Dina agreed to come," Marilyn said, dusting off the bookshelves. "She's so busy at college with all the projects and parties." "She's young," Garrett shrugged. "When I was her age, I wasn't too keen on coming home either." "By the way, did you remember that she wanted to talk to us about a summer internship? I think they have some kind of program in Europe." "Where are we going to get the money for that?" Marilyn sighed. "Maybe we'll think of something. She's so excited about it. Besides, there are grants." "We're already up to our eyeballs in debt for her tuition," Garrett said. "We don't need to go to Europe. You don't even want to discuss it." "There's nothing to discuss. There's no money." Marilyn glared at him angrily and silently continued cleaning. This is it, Garrett thought. One of 1,000 little cracks in their relationship. He had always been practical, always thinking about financial stability. She, on the other hand, thought some things were worth the risk. They used to compromise. Now they were stuck in their positions. Around noon, the sound of a car pulling up in the yard was heard. Marilyn rushed to the window. "Dina!" she cheered, and hurried to the door. Garrett also went to the window. Their daughter was parking her used Hyundai next to his Ford, a bright, vivid replica of Marilyn in her youth. The same brown hair, the same smile that lit up her whole face when she saw her mother on the doorstep. They hugged, and Marilyn immediately began gibbering, asking about the road, about college, about friends. Dina answered just as animatedly, and Garrett suddenly felt superfluous. The two of them had always been on the same page. He sometimes joked about raising 2 women in the house, but there was often some truth to his jokes. "Daddy!" Dina finally noticed him and rushed over to hug him. She smelled of some new perfume with vanilla and something citrusy. Her hair was shorter than the last time they'd met, cut in some fashionable way. Garrett hugged his daughter tightly, feeling his heart clench. What an adult she had become. "Hello, little girl. Did you have a good trip?" "Yeah, the roads are clear. Everyone's out of town for the weekend." Dina took a step back and looked at him. "You lose weight?" "Yeah? I hadn't noticed," Garrett shrugged. "Definitely lost weight," Marilyn confirmed. "I've been telling him to eat better, not grab sandwiches." "I bet you're working overtime." Dina shook her head. "Someone has to pay your tuition," Garrett said, but he regretted it when he saw her smile fade. "Well, let's not talk about sad things," Marilyn intervened. "Dina, can you help me in the kitchen? Grandma will be here soon and I haven't finished the dessert yet." Dina nodded and picked up her bag and followed her mother. Garrett watched them go, feeling a familiar bitterness. It was always like this one bad comment and the contact was lost. He'd never been able to talk to his daughter the way he wanted to. Always found a way to ruin it. Scolding to himself, Garrett grabbed his car keys and headed for the door. "I'm getting wine," he shouted toward the kitchen, and walked out without waiting for a response. The supermarket was 15 minutes away. Garrett deliberately stalled, wandering aimlessly between the shelves. He picked up 2 bottles of red Leona like dry, and Ray preferred semi-sweet. Then he took a long time to choose a white, although he knew perfectly well that Marilyn always took the same Chardonnay. Finally, adding a 6-pack of beer to the basket, he headed for the cash register. On his way out of the store, he was called out, "Garrett, what a meeting!" When he turned around, he saw Trevor Hope himself. The neighbor was smiling his trademark white-tooth smile, for which women loved him so much. Smart, trim, in an impeccably tailored polo shirt and khaki pants. The complete opposite of Garrett, with his working hands and tired look. "Trevor?" Garrett nodded dryly. "Shopping for lunch? Marilyn said you were having a family reunion today." The mention of his wife's name made Garrett's breath catch. So they'd discussed it? When? At the pool? Or later? "Yeah, the daughter's here. And the mother-in-law." "Oh, how wonderful. Family is the most important thing," Trevor said enthusiastically. "Marilyn speaks so warmly of you all." Trevor went on and on about family values, but Garrett wasn't listening. He knew I'd seen them. He knows I've seen them. He knows, and he's mocking me. "Yeah, I guess so," he interrupted his neighbor's monologue. "Sorry, I gotta go. They're waiting at home." Sure. Trevor clapped him on the shoulder. "Say hi to Marilyn and your daughter. What's her—" "Dina," Garrett hissed. "That's right, Dina. She must be as beautiful as her mother." Garrett nodded silently and headed for the car, feeling Trevor's eyes on him. His neighbor's blatant flirting made him nauseous. Was Marilyn falling for these cheap compliments? This fake concern? On the way home, Garrett went over the plan once more in his head. The video, the big screen, everyone together at the table. For the first time in months, he felt a surge of energy. When he returned, Dina and Marilyn were still in the kitchen. There was laughter and the aroma of baking. Garrett set the bag of wine on the table in the hallway and walked quietly to the doorway. Dina was saying something about her history professor who kept mixing up dates, and Marilyn was listening, chopping vegetables for a salad. Both were smiling, and for once Marilyn looked genuinely happy. He stood like that for a few minutes, watching them when Marilyn's cell phone rang. She wiped her hands on a kitchen towel and looked at the screen. Her smile became a little more strained. "Excuse me, I'm going to answer it. It's work-related." Marilyn stepped out into the hallway, and Garrett hurriedly retreated into the shadows of the living room. She didn't notice him, turning her back and lowering her voice. "Hello? No, I can't talk right now. Yes, she's here. Of course I remember. Listen, let's talk later, okay?" Garrett couldn't hear the voice on the other end, but he was sure it was Trevor, the one who was just pretending to be the friendly neighbor at the supermarket. "No, that's not a good idea," Marilyn continued. "Look, I'll call you back when I can." "Yeah, okay, bye." She hung up the phone and stood motionless for a few seconds, staring into the space in front of her. Then she took a deep breath, squared her shoulders and went back into the kitchen, back to being the carefree lady of the house. Garrett waited a few minutes and then went into the kitchen, pretending he'd just returned. "I brought the wine," he announced, setting the bag on the table. "Oh, good," Marilyn perked up. "I hope you got that Chardonnay I always get." "Of course I did," Garrett lied. "How could I forget?" Dina looked at him with a strange look, as if she suspected something. She'd always been observant, his girl. "Dad, is everything okay?" she asked. "You seem kind of tense." "I'm fine," Garrett waved her off. "I'm just tired. It's been a hard week at work." "You should get more rest," Dina said. "Seriously, you look exhausted." "I tell him the same thing," said Marilyn, "but your father is too stubborn." They exchanged understanding glances, and Garrett felt excluded from their little circle again, as if they were talking about him, not to him. "I'll go sort out the wine," he mumbled, and left the kitchen. In the living room, Garrett went to the TV and checked the connection. Everything was working properly. He picked up his phone and watched the video one more time, making sure it was easily accessible. The plan was simple. Wait until everyone was at the table and turn on the tape. But now, as the moment of truth drew near, Garrett began to doubt. Was he doing the right thing? Should he humiliate Marilyn in front of everyone, especially his daughter? Wouldn't it be better to talk to her alone? No, he decided. For too long, everything had been hidden under the rug. For too long, they'd pretended everything was normal. Time to bring the truth out into the light. Dina and Marilyn's laughter came from the kitchen, so genuine and carefree. Garrett stood in the semi-darkness of the living room clutching the phone and felt the tension building by the minute. In the Fane house, the chatter and laughter grew as the guests gathered. Leona Porter arrived at exactly 2 o'clock, as promised. Tall, straight, with her silver hair perfectly styled, she entered the house with the look of a queen condescending to her subjects. In her hands she held a rhubarb pie, her signature and, she thought, unrivaled. "Marilyn, baby, you look tired. Are you getting enough rest?" she asked, kissing her daughter on the cheek instead of greeting her. "I'm fine, Mom," Marilyn waved her off. "It's just a lot of work before lunch." "I could have come earlier and helped," Leona said reproachfully, handing the pie to Garrett, who had gone out into the hallway. "Garrett, I hope you didn't make my daughter do everything alone." "I was helping," Garrett replied dryly, accepting the pie. "And it's good to see you, Leona." His mother-in-law gave him an appraising look as if she expected something new but was disappointed. "Dina!" she exclaimed when she saw her granddaughter coming down the stairs. "Come here, my beautiful girl." Dina hugged her grandmother and she showered her grandmother with compliments, noting her new haircut, her complexion, and her stylish clothes. Garrett watched them standing off to the side. Leona was always generous in her praise of her daughter and granddaughter, but he received only remarks and advice he didn't ask for. Half an hour later, the Sargents, an elderly couple, family friends from the days when Garrett and Marilyn had first married, drove up as well. Ray, a stocky man with thinning hair and a good-natured smile, immediately shook Garrett's hand and patted him on the shoulder. "How's it going, old boy? Still working at the shipyard?" "I've got a lot to do," Garrett answered. "And you're not retired yet?" "Huh. Tried to quit last year, but they called me back. Said they couldn't do it without me," Ray said, his chest heaving with pride. "They don't know how to work with customers." Ray was a senior sales manager for a company that sold marine equipment. He and Garrett met when he came to order parts for the factory. Winona, Ray's wife, a petite woman with bright red dyed hair, was already chirping with Marilyn and Leona in the kitchen. Her tinkling laughter carried to the living room where the men had settled down with their beers. The table was set in the great room and soon everyone was seated at it. Marilyn served tuna and vegetable casserole, salad, and fresh bread. Garrett uncorked the wine, red for Leona and Ray, white for the others. He poured himself a beer, though he didn't usually drink at the table when they had guests. "So, Dina, tell me, how's college going?" Leona asked, spreading butter on the bread. "Still thinking about changing your major?" "Yes, Grandma. I talked to a counselor and he said I could switch from business administration to international relations without too much trouble. I just need to take a couple extra courses over the summer." "International relations?" Garrett frowned. "What's wrong with business? At least you'll have a job when you graduate." "There will be jobs in international relations too, Dad," Dina replied patiently. "I was just about to tell you about the internship program in Brussels. It's a chance to work in the office of the European Parliament." "In Europe?" Leona glowed. "What a wonderful opportunity. When do I have to apply?" "I've already applied," Dina glanced at her father. "But even if I'm selected, I'll have to pay my own living expenses and airfare. They give a scholarship, but it's not much." "How much will it cost?" Garrett asked, sipping his beer. "About $3,000, Dina said quietly, as if she hoped they wouldn't hear her. "3,000? Garrett shook his head. "Where are we going to get that kind of money? I just paid for your next semester, and the bill for the roof repairs hasn't been closed yet." "Garrett," Marilyn intervened, "we could put off fixing the garage. It's not that urgent." "And when the rains flood all my tools, then what?" he snapped at her. "I can help," Leona said suddenly. "After all, I have savings, and who better to spend them than on my granddaughter's education?" Garrett clenched his teeth, feeling a wave of irritation rising inside. Of course, Leona wouldn't miss an opportunity to show what a generous grandmother she was and how he, a loser, couldn't provide for his family. "It's not worth it," he cut him off. "We'll figure it out on our own." "Garrett," Marilyn said quietly, but he had already gotten up to get another bottle of beer from the refrigerator. "It's always the same," he heard Leona's voice behind him. "Pride doesn't allow him to accept help, but he can't give anything himself." "Mom, please," Marilyn whispered. Garrett returned to the table. The conversation had already turned to another topic. Ray was talking about the new mayor of New Bedford and his plans for the development of the port infrastructure. They say they want to tear down a whole block and build new docks, but the public is against it, of course. "What about your neighborhood?" Winona asked, turning to Garrett. "It's not far from the shipyard, right?" "Yes," he shrugged. "But it won't affect us. Our houses are too far from the harbor." "I heard they're building a new shopping center near you," Leona interjected. "Marilyn said it might raise real estate prices." "That's the first I've heard." Garrett looked at his wife, who was suddenly very busy arranging the salad. "I just found out yesterday," she explained. "Trevor told me. He has a lot of information about these things at the insurance company." "Trevor?" Leona asked. "Is that your new neighbor? You talked about him last time. The lonely man with the nice house." "Yes," Marilyn nodded, not looking at Garrett. "He moved in about a year ago. Works for Liberty Mutual Insurance Company manager." "Oh, a decent job," Leona said approvingly. "And an educated man, I take it." "Graduated from Boston University," Marilyn replied. "Economics." Garrett watched this exchange of remarks, feeling his anger boiling up inside him. So Marilyn knows these details about Trevor, discusses him with her mother, and he, the husband, isn't even aware of the development plans near their house. "Do you two talk a lot?" he asked casually. "Sometimes," Marilyn shrugged. "He's a friendly neighbor." "Very friendly," Garrett mumbled and took a big swig of beer. There was an awkward pause at the table, which Dina broke. "We have a new European history professor at the college. He's so funny he keeps getting the dates mixed up. He talks about the French Revolution and then suddenly switches to the fall of the Berlin Wall." Everyone was relieved to pick up on the theme, and the tension eased a little. The dinner continued, and Garrett became increasingly silent, only occasionally inserting short phrases. He watched Marilyn, the way she laughed, the way she fixed her hair, the genuine interest she took in her guests' stories. When was the last time she had listened to him so attentively? After the casserole, Marilyn served dessert, Leona's pie and her own chocolate cheesecake. Garrett got up to fetch coffee. In the kitchen, pouring the hot liquid into the coffee pot, he pulled out his phone and watched the video one more time. There it was. Proof that his wife no longer belonged to him completely, that she was living some other life that he could only guess at. Uncorking another bottle of beer, he took a sip in the kitchen. A pleasant warmth spread through his body, not intoxication, but enough to dull the fear of what he was about to do. Back in the living room with the coffee pot and beer, Garrett noticed that the conversation had turned to the subject of vacations. "Ray and I are thinking of going to Florida in November," Winona said. "It's not so hot there and the prices are lower." "That's a wonderful idea," said Leona. "And you, Marilyn, when was the last time you went anywhere? It's been what, 3 years since you've been anywhere?" "4," Marilyn corrected. "Not since we went to New York with Dina before she went to college." "I can't afford a vacation," Garrett said, pouring coffee into cups. "We don't have enough for repairs, let alone travel." "Oh, don't start talking about money again," Leona rolled her eyes. "If you plan your budget properly, you can always save a little for a vacation." "Mom," Marilyn said in a warning tone. "I'm just saying that life doesn't have to be all work and debt," Leona continued, ignoring her daughter's warning. "You have to think about yourself sometimes. If you were a little more ambitious, Garrett," Mrs. Porter, Ray interjected, This cheesecake is delicious. Marilyn, you must share the recipe with Winona. Garrett nodded gratefully to his old friend. Ray always knew how to diffuse the situation when Leona launched her attacks. But today, it only delayed the inevitable. While everyone enjoyed dessert and discussed recipes, Garrett sipped his beer and considered his next move. The moment was approaching. He finished the bottle and set it aside. "You know what?" he said suddenly, interrupting the conversation. "I have an interesting video. I'd like to show it to you all." "A video?" Marilyn was surprised. "What video?" "You'll see." Garrett stood up and walked over to the TV. "I accidentally filmed something interesting yesterday." He took out his phone and opened the option to connect to the TV screen. He used the remote to turn on the big screen on the wall. "Garrett, what are you doing?" Marilyn looked puzzled but not alarmed. She didn't yet understand what was going on. "I want to show everyone what friendly neighbors we have." "Friendly neighbors," he answered, making the connection. The TV screen lit up, showing Garrett's phone interface. He found the video file and pressed play. The room fell into silence as the screen showed an image of a pool and two people in it. At first it wasn't very clear what was going on. The camera was a little shaky, the angle wasn't the best. But soon everyone could see Marilyn in a red swimsuit and a man swimming next to her. "What's that?" Leona began, but stopped talking when Trevor swam closer to Marilyn in the video, whispered something in her ear, and she laughed. Marilyn froze in her chair, staring wide-eyed at the screen. Her face turned white, then flushed. Dina froze too, shifting her gaze from the screen to her mother, then to her father. In the video, Trevor was helping Marilyn out of the pool, his hand lingering on her waist longer than necessary. They stood close, too close for normal neighbors, and talked quietly about something, smiling at each other. "Turn it off," Marilyn whispered, but Garrett pretended not to hear. "That's the kind of neighborly relationship we have," he said, looking directly at his wife. "Very warm, as you can see." "Garrett, I don't understand what you," Marilyn began, but Leona interrupted her. "What do you mean?" The mother-in-law stared demandingly at Garrett, then at her daughter. "Marilyn? It doesn't mean anything." Marilyn tried to get up, but Garrett moved closer, keeping her from leaving. "I think it does," he said. "It means that my wife spends time in the pool with the neighbor while I'm at work, and they're having a great time by the looks of it." "Garrett, stop it." Tears came into Marilyn's voice. "It's not what you think." "What am I supposed to think, Marilyn?" he asked, feeling the alcohol give him courage. "When I see my neighbor hugging my wife, when I hear you talking to him on the phone and keeping it from me." "What are you talking about?" Ray intervened, looking very uncomfortable. "We should probably go—" "Sit down," Garrett cut him off. "You wanted to know what was going on in our family, didn't you? Here, look." "Dad, come on," Dina finally found her voice. "You're drunk. It doesn't mean anything." "Are you protecting her?" Garrett turned to his daughter. "Of course, you two have always been on the same side, always 2 against 1. "No one's against anyone here," Marilyn stood up. "Garrett, let's talk in private. This isn't a topic for what? A family dinner?" He grinned bitterly. "I think it's perfect. Everyone's here, everyone can see." The video ended on the screen and automatically began to play again. Again, the pool. Again, Marilyn and Trevor. Again, their laughter and touching. "I was swimming in my neighbor's pool. It's not a crime." Marilyn finally pulled herself together. "Trevor suggested it, and I said yes. It's nothing to be ashamed of." "Really?" Garrett shook his head. "Why didn't you tell me you were going? Why did you keep it a secret?" "I didn't. I told you he offered to use the pool. You just never listen to what I say." "Marilyn," Leona's voice sounded stern. "Is it true? Are you seeing this man?" "No!" Marilyn exclaimed. "God, Mom, of course not. We're just neighbors. He's a friendly man, that's all." Very friendly, said Garrett sneeringly, especially to married women. You know what? Marilyn straightened suddenly, fury flashing in her eyes. It's your own fault. You didn't even notice that I bought a new bathing suit 3 weeks ago. You didn't notice that I cut my hair. You didn't notice that I'm trying to diversify our lives. You don't notice anything but your goddamn factory and your bills. So it's my fault you're flirting with your neighbor? Garrett raised his voice. Because I don't admire your haircut enough? I'm not flirting with him, Marilyn was almost shouting. But yes, at least he sees me as a woman, not just the mother of your child and a cook. There was a heavy silence in the room. Dina was crying quietly, tucked into her napkin. Winona put her hand on her shoulder, trying to comfort her. Ray stared at the floor, clearly wishing he were anywhere but here. Leona, on the other hand, sat up straight, lips pressed together, with an ineffable expression on her face. I think we all need to calm down, she finally said. Garrett, turn off that video. Marilyn, sit down. Let's talk like adults. But Marilyn was already on her way out of the room. No, Mom, I'm not going to sit here and listen to accusations. Nothing happened between me and Trevor. Nothing. I just wanted to feel alive for a few hours. She stopped in the doorway and turned to Garrett. Were you secretly filming me, spying on me? And now you're making this scene in front of the whole family? In front of our daughter? How could you do that? Without waiting for an answer, Marilyn ran out of the room. Upstairs, the bedroom door slammed. The living room was left with shocked guests, a crying Dina and Garrett, who suddenly felt that his plan of revenge had turned out to be something different than he had expected. You're such an asshole, Dina said quietly, getting up and following her mother upstairs. He finally hit the stop button and the screen went blank. In the silence that followed, all that could be heard was the ticking of the clock on the wall and the muffled sobs coming from upstairs. Garrett was still standing by the TV, clutching the remote in his hand. The only people at the table were Leona, whose face was a mask of disapproval, and the sergeants, Ray tapping his fingers nervously on the tablecloth and Winona whispering in his ear. There were muffled voices coming from the second floor, Marilyn's and Dean's. Garrett couldn't make out the words, only the intonations, the soothing tone of his daughter's voice and his wife's interrupted speech. Leona was the first to break the silence. Well, Garrett, she crossed her arms over her chest, are you satisfied? You put on a show. What now? What did you want? He snapped at her. You want me to keep quiet while my wife has fun with the neighbor? Having fun? Leona snorted. All I saw on that video was Marilyn swimming in the pool. Yes, with a man, but nothing that could be called. You didn't see the way they looked at each other, Garrett interrupted her. The way he held her hand. The way she laughed. Laughing? Leona shook her head. God, what a crime! A woman must be unhappy in the presence of other men or else it's treason. Leona, Ray interposed conciliatingly, let's all calm down. Garrett, old boy, I understand your feelings, but perhaps you've jumped to conclusions. I agree, Winona nodded. We all see what we want to see sometimes, or afraid to see. Garrett was about to answer, but the doorbell rang. Everyone froze, looking at each other. Who the hell is that? Garrett muttered, heading for the door. There was Trevor Hope himself, in a perfectly pressed shirt and a concerned expression on his face. Garrett, he began, I'm sorry to intrude, but Marilyn isn't answering her phone and I'm worried. She left her scarf at my place yesterday. I wanted to return it. He stopped talking, noticing the look on Garrett's face and the tense atmosphere behind him where the others were gathered in the hallway. Had something happened? Trevor asked, and his genuine concern only made Garrett angrier. You dare ask? He gritted his teeth and stepped forward. You, Garrett, Leona's shout stopped him. Don't you dare make another scene. What's going on? Trevor looked confused. Come in, Garrett said, surprised at himself. Since you're here, let's talk. Trevor entered the house cautiously. Garrett led him into the living room where the big TV was still on, though the screen was black. "Garrett, can you explain?" Trevor began, but stopped talking when Marilyn appeared in the doorway, her eyes red with tears. Dina followed her, supporting her mother by the shoulders. "Trevor?" Marilyn said in surprise. "What are you doing here?" "I brought your scarf." He raised his hand with a blue silk scarf. "You forgot it yesterday. I couldn't get a hold of you, so I thought I'd come by." He hesitated, shifting his gaze from Marilyn to Garrett. "I guess this is a bad time." "Very bad timing," Garrett confirmed. "We were just discussing your friendship with my wife." "Garrett," Marilyn said warningly. "No, let's talk." Garrett turned to Trevor. "How long has this been going on?" "How long has what been going on?" Trevor was genuinely surprised. "Don't pretend." Garrett stepped closer. "I saw you yesterday, in the pool. I took a video." "You what?" Trevor shifted his gaze to the TV, then back to Garrett. "You videotaped us? Why?" "Because I'm tired of being a fool," Garrett answered. "I'm tired of pretending I don't see you two." "Like we what?" Trevor was getting angry now. "What are you imagining?" "I saw you touching her. I saw you laughing. I'm not blind." "Garrett, stop it," Marilyn pleaded. "Nothing happened between us. Trevor just asked me to go swimming." "And not for the first time," Garrett added. "Yeah, it wasn't the first time," Marilyn agreed. "What does it matter?" "Look, Garrett." Trevor held up his hands in a conciliatory gesture. "I know how this looks from the outside, but you've got it all wrong. I respect your family, and I would never—" "Of course," Garrett interrupted him sarcastically. "You just happened to be in the pool with my wife, and you just happened to have your arm around her waist, and accidentally whispering something in her ear that made her laugh so hard." "I was telling her a joke," Trevor exclaimed. "Jesus, Garrett, do you really think we're—" He stopped talking, shaking his head. "It's insulting." "To me, too," Marilyn interjected. "Do you really think I'm capable of that, after 20 years of marriage?" "People change," Garrett replied grimly. "And marriages change. You said yourself you wanted to feel alive. With him, not with me." Marilyn took a deep breath and looked at the guests still standing to the side. "Ray, Winona, I think you'd better leave. I apologize for all of this." "Of course, dear," Winona nodded, grabbing her husband's hand. "Call us if you need anything." They quickly said their goodbyes and hurried towards the exit. Leona stayed where she was, crossing her arms. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "I'm not leaving my daughter like this." "This is a family matter," Garrett snapped at her. "I am family," Leona countered. "Mom," Marilyn said softly, "please. We have to figure this out on our own." Leona hesitated but then nodded. "Okay, but I'll be at my hotel. Call me any time." She kissed her daughter on the cheek, hugged her granddaughter, and casting Garrett an annihilating glance, left as well. 4 people remained in the living room: Garrett, Marilyn, Dina, and Trevor. The neighbor broke the awkward silence. "I'm going too. I'm sorry about what happened. Really, Garrett, Marilyn and I have nothing but friendship between us. I would never interfere with your family." He put the scarf on the table by the entrance and headed for the door. "Wait," Dina said suddenly. "Trevor, right? Why don't you tell us what you and Mom talked about, just to clear things up?" Trevor stopped and looked at Marilyn as if asking for permission. She nodded. "Mostly about books," he answered. "Marilyn mentioned that she liked to read, and I suggested some books from my collection. We talked about traveling. I had recently returned from a trip to Italy and was showing her pictures. He faltered. We discussed her idea of opening a bookstore." "A bookstore?" Garrett looked at his wife, puzzled. "What bookstore?" Marilyn sighed. "It was just a dream, Garrett. Nothing serious. I mentioned it years ago, but you didn't pay attention. And you discussed it with him and not me?" "Because he listened," Marilyn answered quietly. He didn't dismiss what I said, didn't tell me it was nonsense, didn't remind me of bills and responsibilities. Garrett felt something tighten in his chest. It was true. He had long ago stopped really listening to his wife. "I'll go," Trevor repeated. "I'm sorry again." Dina walked him to the door and returned a minute later with a determined look on her face. "So," she looked at her parents, "you two need to have a serious talk, and I think I'll leave you two alone." "Where are you going?" Marilyn was worried. "To Amy's," Dina said, calling her old school friend. "I'm going to sleep over. You both need space." "Dina, don't go," Garrett asked, but his daughter was already heading for the stairs. "No, Dad. I can't be between you two anymore. You two—" She shook her head. "You both made me hostage to your unhappy marriage. Mom pretended everything was fine and pushed her dreams deep inside. And you, Dad, were too busy with work and bills to notice that she was unhappy. And neither of you wanted to admit it." Dina went upstairs to get her things, leaving her parents in heavy silence. 10 minutes later, she came down with a small backpack, hugged both of them, and left. Garrett and Marilyn were left alone in a house that suddenly seemed too big and empty. Marilyn was the first to break the silence. "Do you really think I'm cheating on you?" Garrett shrugged, avoiding her gaze. "I don't know what to think. All I know is that you seem happy with him. You're laughing, you're alive, and with me." "I bore you," she finished for him. "I know. I've felt it for a long time." "I'm not bored," Garrett countered. "It's just that we're too used to each other, too bogged down in routine, and I don't know how to fix it." Marilyn sank down on the couch, suddenly looking very tired. "Do you know what the most frustrating thing is?" she asked. "That you think I can cheat on you, after everything we've been through. Is it so unbelievable?" Garrett grinned bitterly. "You're a beautiful woman, Marilyn. I'm an aging mechanic with a bad back and no prospects. What can I give you but stability? And Trevor, he can show you the world, tell you about traveling, support your bookstore dreams." Marilyn looked at him in wonder. "Do you really think that? That I need travel and a bookstore more than you do? Don't you?" He sat down in the chair opposite. "You said yourself you wanted to feel alive. Am I giving you that feeling?" Marilyn was silent for a long time, gathering her thoughts. "You used to," she said at last. "When we were young, when we were married, when we were expecting Dina, you used to look at me like I was the most amazing thing in the universe. And then you stopped looking. You stopped seeing me." "I could say the same thing," Garrett said. "When was the last time you asked me about anything other than bills and repairs? When you were interested in my work, my thoughts?" "Because you were always so exhausted after work," Marilyn countered. "Always so wrapped up in your own problems that I got the impression you didn't care about me. Or maybe I just didn't want to burden you." Garrett stepped forward. "Maybe I saw how tired you were taking care of the house, taking care of Dean, taking care of your job at the supermarket, and I didn't want to add to your problems." They stared at each other, suddenly realizing that they had misunderstood each other's motives for years. "I really didn't cheat on you with Trevor," Marilyn said quietly. He just noticed me, asked about my interests. He listened." "I know," Garrett sighed. "I know now. It's just that when I saw you laughing with him, I can't remember the last time I heard you really laugh, and it hit me." "I don't laugh because I don't feel happy," Marilyn admitted. "But this isn't about you, Garrett, or not just you. It's everything. This town, this routine, the feeling that life is passing me by, that all my dreams are just dreams." "What dreams?" Garrett asked. "A bookstore? Travel?" "Yes," Marilyn nodded. "And not just that. The dream of being more than just a wife and mother. Something meaningful." "You matter to me," Garrett said quietly. "And to Dina." "I know," she smiled weakly. "But sometimes that's not enough. Sometimes you have to be important to yourself, too." They sat in silence, each absorbed in his own thoughts. It was beginning to get dark outside the window. The day was winding down, taking the emotional storm with it, leaving room for fatigue and uncertainty. "What do we do now?" Garrett finally asked. Marilyn shrugged her shoulders. "I don't know. Go on with our lives, I guess. Try to understand each other better. Or, or, or admit that we've changed too much, that maybe we're not on the same path anymore." Garrett felt his heart clench at those words. For all the problems, for all the marriage fatigue, he couldn't imagine life without Marilyn. "Is that what you want?" he asked. "To break up?" Marilyn looked at him for a long time, and in her eyes he saw a reflection of their shared past, their youth, their hopes, their joys, their disappointments, all the things that had shaped them into who they were now. "I don't know what I want," she answered honestly. "All I know is that I can't go on the way we live now. Something has to change." Garrett nodded. He felt the same way: dissatisfaction, emptiness, but also fear of the unknown, of loss. "I'm sorry I made that scene," he said, "on video in front of everyone. It was unforgivable." "Yes, it was," Marilyn agreed. "But maybe we both needed that push, to finally say what we'd been holding back for years." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the fading dusk. "Do you remember when we used to dream about the future, when we were first married?" "I remember." Garrett smiled at the memory. "You wanted to travel the world, and I promised that we would." And then life intervened. Marilyn turned to him. Dina, the house, the job, the debts, all those thens and somedays. "And here we are," Garrett spread his hands. 40-odd years, and we've never been farther than New York." "It's not your fault," Marilyn said softly. "Not just yours anyway. I could have insisted too, I could have found a way. But it was easier to go with the flow. It was easier to pretend everything was okay. And now? Now we have to decide," Marilyn sat down next to him, "if we want to continue together, and if so, what we're willing to change." Garrett took her hand, the first time in a long time that it was not a gesture of habit but of conscious choice. "I don't want to lose you," he said quietly. "But I want you to be happy. And if that means letting you go—" "Don't say that," Marilyn squeezed his hand. "Let's not make any hasty decisions. Let's just, talk. A real talk, like we used to." And they talked, long, openly, sometimes with tears, sometimes with laughter, about how they'd changed over the years, about what they missed, about what they still valued in each other, about how to bring joy and meaning back into their lives. Night fell on New Bedford, shrouding in its darkness the small house on Maple Road where two people were trying to rediscover their way back to each other through years of misunderstandings and miscommunication. An early morning sunbeam peeked through the curtains, causing Garrett to wince and open his eyes. He was lying on the couch in the living room, covered with a blanket. His head was buzzing from the drink he'd had the night before, and there was a foul taste in his mouth. The events of yesterday came back to his mind gradually. The video on the big screen, Marilyn's pale face, Dina's tears, Trevor's appearance, the long conversation with his wife until late at night. Garrett rose from the couch, feeling his neck stiffen from the uncomfortable position. The house was unaccustomed to silence. He went into the kitchen and found a note magnetically attached to the refrigerator. "Went to see my mom. I need time to think. M." The ringing of the doorbell made him wince. Trevor stood on the doorstep, in a simple t-shirt and jeans with a serious expression on his face. "Hi," he said. "Can I come in? We need to talk." Garrett hesitated but then stepped aside. "Come on in." Trevor entered the house, and they walked into the kitchen. Garrett silently poured him coffee. "Is Marilyn home?" Trevor asked. "No." Garrett sat down across from him. "She had gone to her mother's." "Garrett, There was nothing between me and your wife. There never will be. I respect the institution of marriage." "How noble," Garrett said sarcastically. "But I've seen the way you look at her, the way you touch her." "Perhaps I was too friendly," Trevor admitted, "but there was nothing wrong with my intentions. I saw Marilyn as an interesting person to talk to, a person with whom it is pleasant to discuss books, to share impressions." "But you like my wife." It wasn't a question, it was a statement. "Yes, I do. As a person. She's smart, well-read, interesting to talk to. But that doesn't mean I was trying to steal her away. You know what the problem is?" Garrett finally said it. "You see things in her that I've stopped seeing. You listen to her. You ask her about her dreams. And I'm so caught up in the day-to-day, I've forgotten what she's really like." After Trevor left, the doorbell rang again. This time it was Dina. "Hi, Dad," she said. "Can I come in?" "Sure," Garrett stepped back. "You don't have to ask permission. It's your house." "After yesterday, I wasn't sure." Dina walked into the kitchen. "Where's Mom?" "At Grandma's," Garrett answered. "She left a note saying she needed time to think." "Dad, what you did yesterday, it was awful." "I know," Garrett lowered his head. "I'm not proud of it. Not just the video," Dina continued, "but the way you've treated Mom all these years, the way you ignored her." "And you too," Garrett said in surprise. "You didn't notice me either, Dina. Mom was all that mattered to you, her opinion, her approval, and I was just a source of money for your schooling." Dina looked stunned. "No, she didn't. I love you, Dad." "I know," Garrett said softly, "but there's a big difference between love and understanding. You've never tried to understand me." "Dad, you have to talk to her. Really talk to her." "We talked yesterday," Garrett answered. "We talked for a long time, but sometimes words aren't enough." "Then what is?" "Action, I guess," Garrett shrugged. "But I don't know where to start." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of the front door opening. Marilyn stood in the doorway with a small travel bag in her hands. "Hi," she said. "I thought you were still at Amy's," she said to Dina. "I just got back," she replied. You're not at your grandmother's?" "I was." Marilyn set the bag on the floor. "But I realized I couldn't solve my problems hiding behind her back. I came to talk. And pack a bag if you need it." Dina discreetly walked away, leaving her parents alone. "And what decision did you make?" Garrett asked when they sat down in the living room. "At first I thought about taking the essentials and staying with my mother," Marilyn answered. "But then I realized that it was just delaying the inevitable. We need to decide now whether we're trying to save our marriage or recognize that it's exhausted." "What do you want?" "I want to be happy," Marilyn replied simply. "And I want you to be happy. The question is whether we can be happy together or only separately." Garrett told about the conversation with Trevor, admitting that he now believed in his wife's innocence. "You know what I realized yesterday?" he said. "It's not so much that I'm afraid you'll leave me for another man, but that I lost you a long time ago, that you stayed with me out of habit." "I've come to the conclusion that we need to get to know each other again," Marilyn said, "to redefine who we are now and what we want, because the people we were 20 years ago, the people who fell in love with each other, they're long gone. And how do we do that?" "Start small," Marilyn shrugged. "Just talk. About books, about movies, about dreams, about the things we care about. Not about bills, not about repairs, but about what really matters." Marilyn went upstairs to clean up and Garrett pulled out his phone. The video was still there. He hit the delete button and confirmed the action, then went to the cloud storage and deleted the video from there too. The smell of coffee wafted from the kitchen. Dina had brewed a fresh one. From upstairs came the sound of water. Marilyn was taking a shower. The usual sounds of a house that yesterday seemed ready to fall apart. Garrett didn't know what would happen next, whether he and Marilyn would be able to rebuild their relationship or whether they'd decide it was better to go their separate ways. But he was willing to try, ready to get to know the woman he'd married 20 years ago and who had become a completely different person over the years, ready to show her what he had become,